Hey there, this is Tim Ellis, and I am back with another video talking about my artist series. So if you guys can see behind me, this is Paul Gauguin. So in my artist series, I painted some artists that I felt were iconic in that they were super important as to who they were and also the way that they changed art and even changed world culture. And I'm including Paul Gauguin in that series. This was one of my earlier pieces in the series, and I absolutely love this painting. It's one of my favorite ones I've done. I'm actually just going to step back so you can kind of see the scale of it because it doesn't look super huge, but it's 4 feet tall. It's a big piece. So here I go. So here's me standing next to it, and just sitting next to it, you can see, look at my head compared to his head. You probably can't hear me. It's really big. All right. All right, I think that helps with scale a little bit. So I'm going to skip over to my slideshow. Wow, my hair's sticking up. That's all right. You can deal with that, right? Okay, here we go. Here's my slideshow. And let's make me small here. There we go. All right, so this is my painting. You're seeing it pretty big. I'll talk about it more later on, but I just kind of wanted you to get a clear shot of it because the image behind me is a little bit askew. So here we go. So here is an extreme close-up of it. I'm going to mute my camera for a minute so you can see. But if you look really closely there's a lot of subtlety going on in the details. And one of the things I added in the background are these kind of big blobs of color that Gauguin often used in his work. So a lot of simplified shapes, as well, if you look at kind of the green and the blue areas that almost become abstract, and you'll see those sorts of things in some of his pieces. So I didn't try to completely replicate his style. The style is definitely my own, but I really wanted to incorporate some of the elements that make Gauguin who he is. And I always work from black and white photos, so these are all colors I created, but I definitely was inspired by his palettes, as you will probably see. So here is Vincent van Gogh and Gauguin next to each other. And one of the reasons I have these two guys together is you may or may not know that they shared a house for a while and actually painted together and did not get along at all, apparently. So it's kind of interesting to see them together, and just knowing that they were contemporaries and initially kind of friends, and then when they moved in together, as happens with friends many times, things got pretty ugly. And I'm pretty sure the image with Van Gogh where he did chop off part of his ear, I'll talk more about that in my Van Gogh piece, because I did paint Van Gogh as well. Cut off the top of his ear happened while Gauguin was living with him. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'll check my facts before I get back to that. And we looked at this one already, and I'm going the wrong way. Let's go this way. Okay, so here is Gauguin on the left. This is one of my favorite self-portraits that he did. And in this one, he actually included one of my least favorite paintings of himself in the background. So this is his self-portrait with Yellow Christ. And the image on the right is his painting called Yellow Christ. And you can see one of these is flipped. I'm not sure which one is the correct one because they're facing different directions. But when I had art history in college, I had to look at this Yellow Christ painting for days on end. It felt like months, and it might have been, but our history professor felt like this was a really, really important painting and talked ad nauseum about it. I actually hate this painting, the one on the right. I love this painting on the left, the self-portrait. But I just think it's interesting that he included this in his self-portrait, and it's great as a background element, but to me, the Christ seems stuck on this image on the right. I think the landscape is beautiful, the figures are beautiful, and then this Christ looks like completely out of place to me, and stylistically just does not fit, and it just looks very crude and rudimentary, and not in a good way. But let's click ahead and see what else we got to look at here. All right, so some of the things that I think Gauguin did extremely well is his portraiture, his his composition, including figures. A lot of times when people paint people, it's just about representing the image, but he's almost always got an interesting composition. In the self-portrait in the bottom left, notice the flowers on the wall. This is a repeating theme in a lot of his work. This was there probably was wallpaper in this room, but he's painted it in a way where the pattern becomes super interesting. And you'll notice that in the upper right as well, with the pattern behind the girl. And he spent some time in Tahiti, and he's very well known for his Tahitian women that he painted, which is something that was a big part of who he was and what he painted. The portrait in the upper left is also one that I absolutely love. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So look at these colors that he's using. Gauguin died in his early 50s and died in I believe it was 1903. And so most of his work was done in the mid to late 1800s. And some of the art movements that happened kind of after he died really incorporated a lot of the things that I feel like he pioneered. So one of the things is not trying to paint super realistically, but kind of using these flat elements juxtaposed on top of each other. We just saw that with the self-portrait and the Yellow Christ, but you really see this in this bottom left-hand corner with the peacock and the woman standing behind. And some of the elements are very three-dimensional, but this landscape on the right side with the buildings in it, look how lush and beautiful everything is in the background. And a lot of these yellow and extremely modified hues are some of the things we see in Fauvism. Gauguin was considered a post-impressionist, painting after Impressionism, post being after, for those who don't know that. And so not really concerned with capturing realistic light, but taking what we know about light and tweaking it to make things a little bit more exciting. And I think one of the things he did is create kind of these patterns of color to make things super interesting. Now you're really seeing this in this one on the left. Clearly these colors have been tweaked dramatically and are not about making this woman's dress look super realistic. And notice the hands are even kind of horrific, but there's still a really interesting composition. The one in the center, his hand also kind of has this incredibly simplified, almost glove-like element. Now, this isn't because Gauguin couldn't paint. I mean, look at the face in this one. It's a self-portrait, and there's a lot of time and effort put into this face, and it's simplified, but it's incredibly well done. The shadows, the kind of facets of color, facet meaning face or flat elements that are shown in here, very reminiscent of what we see Picasso and Braque doing years later. And I think some of the first times we see these facets of color are in some of Gauguin's paintings. Let me minimize this again, and then the landscape on the right, similar things that we just talked about. So remember the wallpaper on the left image that we saw in Gauguin's self-portrait. We're seeing that showing up again in this seated girl. Really not a lot of intent on realism in this, but a lot of what we see in Fauvism with the changed colors, the patterns in the background, and the really, really interesting layers and facets. She's outlined in blue, not a lot of shading in this, but it's just lovely. And the gentle movement that flows through the image on the left. We've seen the image on the right before, but it includes a lot of those same elements. But on the left, we see it magnified. All right, this self-portrait that we're seeing on the left, once again, we've got the flowers in the background. Very Van Gogh-esque, and I think we definitely see the two of them inspiring each other. And then we see the Tahitian women on the right. I listened to an entire podcast about how Gauguin wasn't really the monster that history has painted him. But apparently he went to Tahiti with his family, slept with a lot of women in Tahiti, and possibly even people that were too young for him to be sleeping with. And he was a married man, so big no-no. Apparently contracted syphilis, shared it with his wife and a lot of other people. And when he did move back to Europe, apparently spread that and apparently went insane and died from it. Now, I heard an entire podcast about how that lineage and history is false. So I don't really know what the truth of the matter is, but we do know he was in Tahiti and he was incredibly inspired by the beauty there of the people and of the landscapes. So let's look at some of his beautiful Tahitian-inspired images, which are some of the first things I saw of his that just really wowed me. The way these women are rendered, it's very stylized, and notice we see the pattern in the fabrics again, creating not a realistic amount of folded fabric, but just beautiful chunks of color juxtaposed against each other, just like we saw with the wallpaper. We're seeing that again on the left here, and we're really starting to see colors that we start to see in Fauvism. Fauvism happened really after Gauguin's time, but I feel like the color shift that he started to experiment with, we really see picked up and run with in Fauvism. And I'll show you some dates in the next image. I'm terrible with dates, so I have to write them down. But a lot of the Fauvist work I really like has a lot of these yellows in it. And you're really seeing this here. Fauvism has a lot of really brilliant colors, but it's basically a complete departure with an intent to represent colors realistically. Remember, Impressionists were really trying to make realistic color as we see it and experimenting with, just as we have rods and cones in our eyes, little dabs of colors to create the intermediate colors, where post-impressionist work was really taking color and experimenting with it more and seeing what we could create that was different from what we actually see. Okay, so here's some artists. I'm gonna minimize again here. So Matisse on the left, 1905. So we're seeing this painting after the death of Gauguin. Gauguin's image in the middle here was late 1800s. So Matisse is at least 10 to 15 years after Gauguin on this sort of painting, which in the art world, when you're talking about a decade, it's a huge amount of time. If you think about how quickly trends go, even today, it's faster with the way information is spread. But think about how a musical genre can change in 10 years. Well, art is the same way. And artists knew each other. They would gather and share their work and talk about things. And so art changed very quickly. And when art ideas happened, we see them kind of infect and influence each other super fast. Look at this painting by André Derain, 1905 on the far right. Same era as Matisse, and we're starting to see these kind of blocks of color. We're seeing yellows and greens and brilliant oranges. Now, I know that this image I showed of Gauguin in the middle does not include a lot of these same colors, but it does have the facets. Notice there's a departure for trying to paint realistically and kind of breaking into these posterized colors. And the colors that Matisse and Derain are using on the right are very similar. Notice there's almost a Mondrian style blockage of colors in the background where you're seeing kind of these rectangles in the background, and you're seeing some of that same element in the Gauguin portrait in the middle, even though his are clearly still objects. I believe Gauguin really put some of this into motion. All right, and I think we already saw this one. We did. Okay, let's go this way. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way. My wheel is doing the opposite of what I want. Okay, this guy, Edvard Vuillard, 1891, contemporary of Gauguin. Now remember, Gauguin died in like 1905. Some of these paintings were done towards kind of the end of Gauguin's life. But one of the things Vuillard was doing, which I think we see in Gauguin's work as well, and I'll make it so you can see all these pieces here. On the far left, notice we kind of see this weird pattern emerging in its infancy. In the middle, we see pattern taking over this entire painting. And on the far right, once again, these patterns of color really showing up and defining what these pieces of art looked like. So Vuillard's mother was a seamstress. So we're looking at a lot of images of people sewing, and also we're seeing really interesting patterns. We see the wallpaper in the background and the patterns in the dresses. Now, notice the gradual simplification of the objects as we move to the right. And then in the next image I'm going to show you, it kind of completely breaks down into where all we really have is these blocks of color and pattern, which are here. So on the one on the left, I think I'm not a huge fan of this painting, but notice even the hands become patterns, almost as we see in the leaves in the bottom right of the same painting. The leaves and the hands kind of look the same. In the upper left-hand corner, some of the distant plant life also looks like the hands. It's not about rendering realistically, it's about creating pattern everywhere. So the plants are a pattern, the dresses are a pattern, and those patterns kind of contrast and create blocks of color, a lot like what we see in Gauguin. So this would have been a contemporary painter with Gauguin. I'm just including it because I think Gauguin did a lot of these same things. The image on the right with the big blocks of fabric and the complete flat portrayal of clothing and even the faces and hair, very reminiscent of what Gauguin was doing. Now, one of the things I like about his paintings of the Tahitian women is we see that same thing with the portrayal of the fabric as pattern. And we also see the natural elements more as pattern. Remember how Vuillard's hands kind of broke into simplified shapes. We're starting to see hands and feet portrayed here kind of as big blocky things, very reminiscent of what we see in some of Picasso's paintings later on. Now, Picasso is notorious for stealing his ideas from everyone around him. And I'll show you some images that I think are derivative of Gauguin's work as well. And remember, the point of what I'm trying to make here is that Gauguin was a pioneer in a lot of his ideas, not that they were all original, but I think we see the things he was experimenting with as an artist, because remember, after the camera, artists had to investigate new ideas, take things in a direction that photography could not, and that kind of lit the fuse for modernism that we see experimenting with so many different things. And in post-impressionism, we see this pattern kind of emerging as something that was dominant in all the art. All right, let's see what else we've got here. So notice how interesting these compositions are. Even though they're incredibly simple, we see three objects on the left with the chair and the two people. We see the patterns in the background like we did with the wallpaper, and as well as in the clothing. We see the yellow tones becoming super dominant, and then on the right we're seeing lots of really intense colors like we see in Fauvism, which has yet to come. Notice the left hand of the woman holding the piece of fruit, kind of reminiscent of what might happen, but it's creating this super interesting gesture, and once again becomes a pattern, kind of balancing the green on the far right. I think the that central composition with the man's back in the middle and the two women on the right, but there's slight variations in the shapes, guide our eyes through the canvas. One of the things that composition does, we think of composition, I always tell my students, if this was my song, after about 3 minutes of this, you'd be like, please stop that. But pattern or composition is visual pattern or visual rhythm. Once we create a pattern that creates rhythm, it becomes interesting, and we like looking at those things. Oh, my microphone thing fell. Let's fix that. So visual pattern becomes interesting, and it makes us want to look at a piece of art. Whereas if it's just about, hey, look what this image is, as opposed to look at the movement and layers and repetition with variation in the image, then we become interested and we can learn things, and our eye moves through the canvas because of the pattern and repeated shapes and repeated colors and the direction of the line that guides us through. You're seeing that in both of these very simply, but with fields of color, with pattern, with simplification, a lot like we saw in all those other images we looked at. And okay. Another one of all these different Tahitian women. We're seeing the beautiful fruit and just, you know, beauty in the flowers and in the women and in the background. Our colors are kind of shifting here a little bit, but we still see some of the extreme changing of hues, which we later see in Fauvism. Okay, here we go with some examples of some of the things that I think were super influential. So look how simplified this image is on the left. This is from 1891. Now remember, a decade in art or a decade in music or in any creative endeavor is a long period of time. So between 1891 and 1923, where Picasso painted this image in the center, we're starting to see this blockiness of bodies. Notice the body on the left, there's really no attempt to make it look real, and they're just becoming kind of these fields of brownish yellow shapes, once again breaking into pattern, just like we see these blocks of color everywhere. So even though Picasso's palette is completely different than what we see Gauguin using, I think the simplification of the shapes and kind of that increase of volume into the kind of these big blocky statuesque elements are really reminiscent of what we're seeing in Gauguin's paintings on the left. Okay, so Matisse in the upper right, who's kind of was considered the main artist of Fauvism that we talked about. Matisse by 1950 was doing paper cutouts and doing these really simple shapes that were put in front of a background. Notice the cat and the woman. The reason I included these is because it's that simplified blockiness that, this is 60 years after Gauguin had painted this image on the left. And I don't think there's a direct correlation from Gauguin to Matisse, but I think that simplification was one of the things Gauguin was experimenting with 60 years before. So pretty cool. All right, I think this one, let me minimize my camera because I think this painting is amazing. Okay, the human body is already beautiful, but one of the things that's so beautiful about this image is the layers of color, the pattern. Notice the water reflecting in the background. You don't even really know if it's water, but your brain tells you it is because of the reflective elements. Really no portrayal of realism there. The blobs of green, the blobs of bluish gray that show us the shrubbery, the woody part of that shrub reaching across the top left. And then the bodies, the way they're intertwined, layering in front of each other, once again gives us this super interesting composition and just such peaceful colors like you would experience just laying around in the sun by the water, soaking up the sun and just experiencing nature. I feel like this just portrays that so beautifully. Like I look at this and I'm just like, ah. And this is some of the work that I was saying first brought me to look at Gauguin and look at his work a little closer. And I love this. I think it's doing everything that I like in art. It's interpreting it. It's changing it from reality. It's conveying something to the viewer that we can experience. And it's just extremely beautiful. Seeing some of the same things here. Notice the flatness of everything, even reminiscent of some of the work we saw Rousseau do with some of his jungle imagery with really flat elements. And we're seeing that here too. I went the wrong way there. So let's go back to my painting. So one of the reasons I included these blocks of color, as you've been hearing me say, and pattern, is because that's what he did. And so when I invented all of this color that we're seeing here, you're seeing some of the Fauvist influence in my painting, some yellows, and I tried to include some of the colors he did use in his palette, and at the same time really bring to life this black and white image that I found of him, and try to also put a little bit of who he was into this piece. So, someone that would move his entire family to Tahiti, we kind of get that adventurer element in this piece. That's one of the things I was going for. And then also all the natural elements that we see, the rhythm and movement in all of the chunks of color and pattern that we see, even in his face and hair, that I tried to incorporate. So That's what I'm going for, and hopefully you enjoy this piece. By the way, this piece at the time of this video is not sold, and I also have paper prints as well as giclée prints of it. So if you're interested in this piece and would like to get a better look at it, it's on my website. I'll put a link to that. And if you want to be the one who buys it, I currently have free shipping, by the way. At least in the United States, you could hang this up in your own home. So anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I have lots of other informational videos on why I painted different artists, and now you know why I painted Gauguin. And if you would like to learn more from me, I also teach beginning drawing, and you can get a free lesson on my website if you subscribe to my newsy updates. So you can do that on my website as well if you'd like to, and I'll put that link below. All right, thanks so much. Please like, subscribe, and share. Tim Ellis. Bye-bye.